When a conversation about faith comes your way, will you be ready? It might happen at work, in a casual chat with a neighbor, or when a friend shares what they believe. In that moment, you don't get to choose the topic, but you can be ready with the truth. That's why Dr. Jim Denison wrote Biblical Insight to Tough Questions, Volume 8. This book explains 9 major world religions and alternative belief systems like Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Mormonism, and more. You'll learn how each compares with Christianity and how you can engage clearly, lovingly, and biblically with those who follow them. We'll send you a copy of Biblical Insight to Tough Questions, Volume 8, to say thanks for your donation to help keep this daily article podcast going strong and equipping you and others with biblical clarity and truth in a confusing world. So please, act today. Visit supportdf.org to help more believers think clearly, live faithfully, and follow Jesus with courage. That's support, the letter D, the letter F, .org. Find the link to give in today's podcast episode notes and receive your copy of Biblical Insight to Tough Questions, Volume 8. Good day. It's Monday, October the 6th, 2025. We're glad you've joined us for Denison Forum's Daily Article Podcast. Today's daily article is written by our co-founder, Dr. Jim Denison, and narrated by yours truly, Chris Elkins. Note, I want to thank Dr. Ryan Denison for writing the daily article last week while my wife and I were traveling. It is a great privilege to partner with him in sharing this ministry with you. 2 stories are leading the news for obvious reasons, but the connection between the two may not be obvious to many, which points to my point today. First, pro-life supporters are strongly opposing a Trump administration decision to approve a new generic version of the mifepristone abortion pill. 2 weeks ago, federal officials said they were conducting a review of the safety of the pills, a decision the activists welcomed. However, the FDA later stated that it has very limited discretion in deciding whether to approve a generic drug. One pro-life leader called the announcement a wildly disappointing decision. Second, mediators are set to meet in Egypt today for indirect peace talks between Hamas and Israel. The talks come after Hamas has accepted some parts of the 20-point U.S. peace plan, including freeing hostages and handing over Gaza governance to Palestinian officials. According to Axios, quote, "This is the closest Israel and Hamas have come to ending the war since the October 7th attacks almost exactly 2 years ago," end quote. However, senior Hamas officials stated that there are still major disagreements that require further negotiations, and their statement made no mention of Hamas disarming, a key Israeli demand included in the U.S. proposal. In his new book, The Origin of Politics, How Evolution and Ideology Shape the Fate of Nations, the Cambridge graduate and science journalist Nicholas Wade writes, "A society operates under 2 sets of rules. One is the rules of human nature, the inherited behaviors selected by evolution because of their survival value. The other is the rules of the society's political system. When the 2 sets of rules conflict, a crisis is likely to follow, which the society must resolve on pain of collapse," end quote. In reading his book as a cultural apologist, I substituted the biblical theme of inherited sin nature for his description of inherited evolutionary behavior. This theme is foundationally manifested in the Garden of Eden, where our first parents sought in Genesis 3 verse 5 to be their own God. From then to today, the will to power has dominated our fallen nature. Since, as Wade notes, political scientists generally agree that the roots of politics lie in human nature, our will to power dominates our politics as well. He adds that human nature is often most evident when proponents of political ideology try to modify or suppress it. When political means are used to modify our basic drive for self-interest and power, our self-interest ultimately prevails. George Washington made a similar observation, quote, "It is a maxim found on the universal experience of mankind that no nation is to be trusted farther than it is bound by its interests, and no prudent statesman or politician will venture to depart from it," end quote. It was because the founders recognized our fallen self-interest that they sought to create, as John Adams noted, a government of laws, not of men. But human laws cannot change human hearts. As the weekend shooting at South Carolina State University tragically illustrates, laws against murder do not prevent all murders. Pro-life supporters will be grateful whenever government officials act in ways that uphold the sanctity of life. But as today's news shows, we must not depend on them always to do so. The same is true for political leaders engaged in war and peace. Each side in the Israel-Hamas conflict has its own self-interest and will act in line with it. Why do political and legal structures not change the human condition? Consider an analogy. You would not expect me to be able to speak words that raise the dead. The reason the crowds were astonished when Jesus did this, illustrated in Luke 7 and John 11, was that such an act was indeed miraculous. Here's the problem. Fallen humans are just as dead spiritually and morally as if we were dead physically. Because, as Romans 6 verse 23 states, the wages of sin is death. We are dead in our trespasses, according to Ephesians 2:5, since our self-reliance cuts us off from the resurrecting and transforming power of our Creator. As Oswald Chambers explains in My Utmost for His Highest, the disposition of sin is not immorality and wrongdoing, but the disposition of self-realization, I am my own God, end quote. The good news, as he added in today's reading, is this. The moral miracle of redemption is that God can put into me a new disposition whereby I can live a totally new life. This happens when we yield to God's Spirit, allowing Him to recreate the disposition that was in Jesus Christ. Here we discover one way God redeems the moral failures that dominate each day's news. As Chambers notes, God cannot work this miracle of transformation in my life until I am conscious I need it. Our Father cannot change our hearts without our heart's consent. This is why the first beatitude in Matthew 5 verse 3 is foundational to the sermon that follows. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When we honestly recognize our abject spiritual poverty, we abdicate the throne of our hearts and enthrone God as our King. As a result, we experience from Matthew 6 verse 10 the kingdom of heaven, the realm where God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. Imagine such a life-transforming, grace-infused, love-centered world. Now, decide if you will pay the price to experience it personally. Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously observed, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. Is Jesus calling you today?
Thank you for listening to today's Daily Article podcast. If you would also like to read the daily article with its citations and references linked to their sources, find links in the episode notes to read today's article and to subscribe to the Daily Article email newsletter.